Memories That Linger by shaypanda26. Peter would tell you that he never wanted to be a teacher. He would tell you that he's just doing this to give back to the world the knowledge that he had too much of, but no outlet for. He would say that he didn't give up being Spider-Man because he feared messing things up again, but because there were better superheroes out there and he doesn't have the time to be a superhero anymore. But Peter would be lying, and there was no one out there who could prove him wrong. So, when Peter became a teacher at Midtown High, adored by all the students and respected by all the teachers, he used his wit and his grit, and he made the most of it. "Alright class, if you don't turn in your assignments by the end of class, I will personally haunt your nightmares with poorly written chemical equations," Peter quipped, leaning against his desk with an easy smirk. The students laughed, half in amusement, half in fear. Peter's class was always enjoyable, and he prided himself on it. "Well, I'll let you get to it." Just as he finished his sentence, a knock sounded at the classroom door. "Come in," Peter called. It had been a while since Peter was ever shocked at the presence of someone. What with experiencing an intergalactic war and fighting with different versions of himself, he was never shocked anymore. But Peter knew heartache and fear, and maybe that was what stopped him when 15-year-old Morgan Stark walked in, looking like a replica of her father. "Oh, you must be the new student. Welcome to chemistry, I'm Mr. Parker. Why don't you introduce yourself to the class?" Peter grinned, trying to hide the inner turmoil he was currently feeling. Morgan faced the class, looking like she'd rather be anywhere but here, and introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Morgan Potts." Whispers could be heard across the classroom, and Peter tried his best to regain the attention of his students. "Alright class, I know having a new student is exciting and all, but please settle down. Morgan, it's great to have you in class. Find a seat and I'll get to you soon." She nodded and sat at the back of the class, staring out the window. "Alright kids, listen up. Like I said earlier, you have this class to finish up your assignment. If you need any help, don't ask, I'll come around. Okay, we've wasted enough time. Now get to work." Peter laughed as his students groaned, but ignored their protests and walked to his new student. Morgan looked up at him as Peter pulled a nearby unoccupied chair and straddled it, facing Morgan. She lifted a brow, but said nothing else. "Hello, Morgan. I hope you've settled into school and your routine. How are you finding it so far?" He kept his tone light, hoping to get some more out of the girl. She had grown since the funeral, and Peter could see all the ways she looked like her father, but that far too perceptive gaze could only be her mother's as she slightly squinted at him, trying to study him. It was a bit before Morgan replied. "Fine, I guess." "Well, that's great," he smiled kindly. "Here's a sheet of chemical equations. This is just to test your level in the class so I know where to start. If you need any help in anything, just let me know." She nodded and he left her there to complete the work. It was 2 weeks before Morgan approached Peter for anything. It was at the end of class on Tuesday when she stopped by his desk. He looked up from his laptop and raised a brow at her. "Done studying me, I see. Did you find anything interesting?" he said, chuckling and sitting back in his chair. At her lack of reply, he asked, "Is there anything you need, Morgan?" "Mr. Parker, I was wondering if you would help me sign up for the Chemistry and Robotics Club." "Of course," he grinned, sitting up. "I'll totally help you. Meet me at my office during lunch and we can sign you up." She smiled slightly and nodded before leaving the class. He was glad that Morgan was starting to get more involved in school activities. He was worried at first when she avoided talking to the other students, despite them including her in their conversations, but this was good. He would make sure that she would be as comfortable and as happy with her school life as possible. That was the least he could do. Morgan came to the next chemistry club meeting on Thursday, and he had never seen her more focused and alive before. He was happy that she enjoyed the club activities as much as he did. They were in a lab, and each student was working on their own projects, so Peter decided to approach Morgan. "What are you working on, Morgan?" he asked as he stood by her station, bent over examining her work. "Nothing. just something random I wanted to try out." Peter hummed before abruptly straightening his posture, startling the girl. She quickly turned to face him, eyes wide with alarm, but before she could say anything, he grabbed the beaker she was using, examining the mixture with a deep frown. Slowly, he set it down, his gaze shifting to Morgan. His eyes searched hers before he turned away and cleared his throat. When he turned back around, he kept his eyes on the solution. "Where did you come up with this solution?" he asked light-heartedly, or at least tried to. It was hard not to sound so interrogative, but he had to know. "Oh," she said, looking back at her work. She paused a little, seeming to decide how much to tell him. "It's something I found in my uncle's old lab that I wanted to try out," she said quietly, trying not to gain the other students' attention, which thankfully worked. Peter knew she was referring to her father. Because of Tony Stark's immense fame, Midtown High had decided to list him as Morgan's uncle rather than her father in official records, and changed her name to her mother's maiden name in an attempt to keep prying students and unnecessary attention at bay. Peter had found it amusing. Tony Stark, a man larger than life, reduced to nothing but a footnote in her school records. And yet, despite the changed title, the weight of who she was never really faded. Peter wasn't supposed to know that Tony was her father. No one was. So he simply nodded, all too glad to play along with the lie they had all agreed to tell. "Do you know what it's supposed to do?" he asked. "Not really, but I know it's not dangerous," she said. But before Peter could reprimand her, she quickly stated, "Listen, I know I shouldn't be bringing things from my uncle's lab to test out at school, but I made sure it wasn't dangerous, and this was the only place I could figure out what it was." Whoa, it's all right, you're not in trouble," Peter chuckled, but his expression turned quickly serious. "I'm glad you understand how dangerous it is to bring random experiments from your uncle's lab. Something like that could put the entire school at risk. You got lucky this time, but next time, maybe not. If you ever come across one of his old projects and want to test it out, come to me first, all right? Your safety is my top priority, and trust me, these walls weren't built to handle whatever chaos your uncle might have left behind." She nodded, embarrassed and guilty, but Peter put his hand on her shoulder and smiled at her reassuringly. "You are brilliant, Morgan, and you should be proud of yourself. Not anyone can successfully copy a difficult chemical solution such as this one," he said, picking up the sheet that had the instructions on how to make his web fluid. It was one of the first things he created with Tony in his lab. He's surprised that Tony kept it. He smiled at it sadly, then handed it back to Morgan before turning to help his other students. From that moment on, things started looking up. Morgan began seeking Peter out more and more, first for help with chemistry homework, then physics, then club projects. Eventually, it wasn't just academics. She started lingering after class to talk about everything and nothing. Their relationship grew beyond that of a teacher and student. Peter became a true mentor, guiding her not just in school but in life. And although neither of them said it out loud, there was an unspoken understanding between them, one that felt familiar, at least for Peter, like something long lost finally finding its way back. It was finally the end of the semester, and the Robotics Club had won their annual statewide robotics competition. The prize? A field trip to Stark Industries. When Peter had first received the email a month ago about the field trip, he almost, keyword almost, put on his suit and swung through the city, just to release the tension and adrenaline. Instead, he ran, then hit a punching bag until it ruptured. It had been many years since Peter had set foot in those halls, many years since he belonged there. So Peter was nervous, but so was everyone else, and no one remembers him anyway, so everything should go okay, right? Oh, who was he kidding? When did anything go right for Peter? "Alright, kids, I want you to all be on your best behaviour. Don't touch anything unless you want to explain to Stark Industries why their billion-dollar tech is now a pile of rubble," he said, smiling sweetly, though everyone on the bus knew there was nothing sweet about it. As they stepped off the bus, Peter inhaled sharply as he finally looked at the gleaming building before him. Memories came crashing down. Lab sessions with Tony, the weight of a suit he no longer wore, the memories of a person he no longer was. It took all of that he is to just not drop everything and run the other direction. But he saw the looks of awe on his students' faces and gathered the pieces of himself that crumbled to the floor and became Mr. Parker once more. "Whoa, this place looks so cool, Mr. P," one of his students exclaimed, the rest nodding in agreement. "I know, right? So now you should really take my advice to heart if you ever want to come back here in the future for an internship or maybe even a job," Peter replied. As they filed into the building, all his students gathered around who was to be their tour guide. "Hello everyone, my name is Emily, an intern at Stark Industries, and I'll be your tour guide today," she introduced herself enthusiastically. She held a small basket with their badges and ushered them forward to hand them out. "Make sure to keep your badges on you at all times. Our head of security takes his job very seriously and will lead you off the premises if you are seen without them," she said, while pointing to said person. Everyone turned to look at the man. Peter sucked in a breath as he looked at Happy standing nearby, eyeing them all, eyes passing over Peter without recognition. He shouldn't have been surprised as he was. He already knew that all his field trips always end up going to shit anyways, but he had hoped that after Happy had got promoted to asset management, he wouldn't have bumped into him so early, or at all. But with Morgan on the premises, he would never be too far. Peter took a deep breath. He'll be taking a lot of those today, he already knows. He picks up his white badge, displaying his name, and clips it onto his shirt. He notices as everyone stands around collecting their badges, Morgan slides one out of her pocket and clips it on her gold-bordered badge standing out. "All right, I'll go first and you all will follow." Emily's voice brought him back to the present. "Place your belongings here to be checked, then walk through this metal detector," she demonstrates. She turns around after and smiles at the students. It looked like she was about to say something before she was interrupted by one of the students. "Why is your badge a different colour than ours?" "Oh," she said, surprised. "So, the colours of the badges represent your job and clearance level for security purposes. They determine what areas we're permitted access to. There are 9 clearance levels, each with their own corresponding colour. White badges, the first level, are for visitors and press. That is the one you are carrying on you today." She gestured to the badges they were wearing. "Pink is for interns. Purple is for employees. Blue is for department managers. Green is for division heads. Orange for executives. Yellow is for Stark personnel, people who are personally approved by the Starks. Red is for the Avengers and other family members. And, finally, gold is for Stark family members only," she finished. "Now that that's done, shall we move on? Please stand in a line and walk through the metal detector." As the kids lined up preparing to walk through the detector, Peter stood at the back of the line with Morgan. He could feel her nervousness radiating off her. "Hey, you okay there, Morgan?" he asked quietly, tapping her shoulder. She turned to look at him, startled and shocked that he had noticed. She quickly shook her head no and turned back around, her hand covering her badge the entire time. By the time it got to them, Morgan couldn't hide her anxiety any longer and started fidgeting with her hands. "Hey there, sweetheart, just place your stuff right there and walk through," Emily said sweetly. Morgan quietly did as she was told, but as soon as she walked through, a voice rung through the nearby speaker, not too loud to be heard by the entire lobby, but definitely loud enough for all the students to hear. "Welcome back, Miss Morgan. Would you like me to inform Boss that you're back?" Friday called. "No, that's all right, Friday, thanks," she replied. She looked calm and confident, not at all the anxious girl that walked through the detectors. The whole class stood frozen, staring at her, including the tour guide. "Whoa, what was that?" asked one of the kids. The others nodded in agreement, turning to the tour guide for an explanation. She looked just as frazzled as the other kids, but explained. "Oh, that's Friday, Tony Stark's personal digital assistant, but now currently assists the Stark family and the Avengers and monitors Stark Industries. This is my first time hearing her as well." She murmured that last part to herself. Peter had yet to walk through the metal detectors. Once upon a time, he would have been in Morgan's position, anxious to walk through and hear Friday's voice announce him. But he is no longer that kid, and Friday no longer knows who he is. He just took a deep breath and walked through. But as usual, things never go to plan, so when Friday's voice rang once more through the surrounding area, Peter wanted to drown himself in the nearest water fixture. Peter Parker. Nice to see you again? The last part came out as a question, as if she was unsure if they were meeting again. Peter stood still and silent. It had been years since everyone and everything forgot who he was, and he had come to terms with it. But standing here in the lobby of Stark Industries, hearing Friday say his name, even if she didn't know who he was crippling. He watched everyone watch him, some in confusion, others in shock, and one in scrutiny. Have you ever been here before, Mr. Parker? Asked Emily. Not that I know of, Peter lied, looking at the ceiling with a contemplative look, as if he also has no idea why Friday, Tony Stark's personal AI, might know who he is. He looked back at them and smiled shyly. It probably did that because she responded to the person who went in before me. It might have been a slight glitch in the system. He already knows how ridiculous that sounded, but he couldn't think very clearly at the moment. Well, shall we all get on with the tour? We don't have all day, he said, trying to hurry things along. He just wanted to move on already and hope everyone forgot about what just happened. Emily nodded silently, her look lingering for a bit, before turning back to the students and guiding them to where they'll begin the tour. She led them up a couple of floors and to the Avenger Museum, where they would be spending an hour walking through the exhibit. Peter was wandering through the museum when he stopped upon a very familiar display. It was of the Iron Spider suit that Tony had made him. He took a deep breath. It had been a long time since he had seen it, and it looked just as it did the last time. The memories this suit carried. Peter didn't know if he wanted to remember them, but Tony made it for him, so he always would. If no one else would remember, he must. He wondered if Tony could still remember him, if May could too, if the spell affected the dead as much as it did the living. He hoped not. He wouldn't know how much longer he could survive if it did. Peter was frowning to himself, lost in thought, when he felt someone walk up next to him. He looked to his right and saw Morgan silently staring at him. I know, I'm way more interesting than the Avengers exhibit, but shouldn't you be enjoying it with the rest of your classmates? He said jokingly. He raised a brow when she didn't reply, and turned back to look at the display holding the Spider-Man suit. Do you like Spider-Man? I think he's pretty cool, but he's been gone a while, so I don't think many people remember him anymore. But I remember a couple years ago, Why does Friday know you? Morgan asked bluntly. Oh, we're going right into it, I guess. Well, I don't think she knows me personally. As I said earlier, it was probably a glitch in the system, Peter says, knowing it sounds unconvincing. Friday never gets confused or glitches. My dad made sure of that. She said, "Nice to see you again, Mr. Parker," Morgan replied, looking at him very seriously and maybe a little betrayed. Are you interrogating me to avoid the kids who want to interrogate you? Peter said, eyebrows raised, smirking. He knew this form of deflection wasn't going to work on Morgan, and was proven right when she scowled at him. He just laughed and turned back to look at the Spider-Man display. Curiosity killed the cat, Morgan, he said good-naturedly. But satisfaction brought it back, she huffed. Her head held high and walked away, muttering to herself how hard it's going to be to get information out of him. He chuckled to himself, amused. She was as quick-witted as her father. She was going to be difficult to dodge, but he thought he might not mind. Maybe it was worth it to let one person, albeit the daughter of his dead mentor, know who he was, what he went through. He shook his head to rid the thought and looked down at the plaque, his fingers running over the initials written on it. T.S. He sighed again. It had been almost 10 years since the death of Tony Stark, and the world still felt his absence like a hole that hadn't been patched. After the world forgot who he was, Peter had buried the suit in his closet and got his GED. He was able to enter a decent university nearby and work at the same time. It wasn't easy, and he's glad all those years are over. He hadn't allowed himself to think of what could have been in so long. It wasn't worth it because nothing would change. But looking at Tony's initials, he allowed himself to reminisce and imagine. Life would have truly been worth living. It was just then, as he traced the initials, he saw the faded outline of 2 letters. After some inspection, he realised the letters were the same. P. His initials. He stumbled back from shock, looking back up at the suit. What the fuck? Why were his initials there? He read the plaque again, searching for where he may have hinted his contribution to the suit. That's when he realised he'd been interrupted before he could finish reading, because there, at the end of the plaque, was written, "Honourable mention to Spider-Man. This suit couldn't have been finished without the contribution of your designs. You are one hell of an Avenger. T.S." He heard Emily gathering up the students and went along with them as they continued the tour. He tried to wrap his head around what he saw, because it didn't make sense. But that's something else he had to tuck into the back of his mind for later inspection, at a more appropriate time. They walked through multiple departments, some students more interested than others, before they reached the lab. Peter was actually excited for this one. Despite the whirlpool of emotions he was drowning in, the lab will always be the place that made him feel the most alive. They met with the head of one of the projects in a lab on the 73rd floor. He could see his students bouncing in excitement, and he smiled to himself. He loved teaching, and he loved his students. While the trip may be hard for him, it was so worth seeing their excited and amazed faces. As Peter focused on what the scientists were currently working on, he noticed it was a medical bot. Similar to Dummy, but specifically for medical purposes and more widely distributed. He remembered him and Tony working late nights, creating drafts and coming up with ideas for these exact bots. He saw one of his own designs hanging on the reference board. He huffed. Even though he was erased, his work was definitely not. He didn't know what it meant, but he trusted it meant something good. That despite everything, him being here, wasn't a late-night dream he conjured up in the depths of grief. "So, I have a little activity for you guys. Follow me." The scientist, Dr. Miller, Peter read his tag, led all the students to the next lab, which was noticeably bigger, and prepared for a class of 25 students. "We have set up multiple stations in this lab, where you can all make your own robots. You're part of the Robotics Club, so there won't be any instructions. I want you all to get creative and create something interesting. I trust you know what you're doing?" he asked, and waited for the students to agree before continuing. "Great. We will hold a ceremony after lunch, and the winners will receive prizes that will be revealed then. You all have an hour to design and complete it. Good luck, everyone." The students were all whispering in excitement and moving to their stations. There were a couple empty stations, so Peter decided to settle in one and maybe create his own robot. He was playing with a couple of parts when Dr. Miller walked over to him. Peter stood up and greeted him. "Hello, Dr. Miller. Thank you for preparing this for my class. They're all so excited, and I'm very grateful that you're making this experience worthwhile." "It was nothing, Mr. Parker. Your students are a gifted bunch, and it's wonderful seeing the youth so interested in the work we do here," Dr. Miller replied kindly. "I noticed you're sitting here instead of with your students. Why is that?" he asked. "Oh, my students know this, but I actually prefer to leave them alone for the first 30 minutes, in order for them to fully flesh out their ideas and get their creative juices flowing. I also don't want to make them nervous by hovering around them. It's good to leave them to their own devices once in a while. They come up with some great stuff in those couple of minutes," Peter responded. Dr. Miller studied him a bit, and Peter became more uncomfortable the longer he looked, before he replied, "You're a hell of a teacher, Mr. Parker. Your trust and belief in your students will take them far. They are lucky to have you." Peter smiled proudly. "Thank you, Dr. Miller." "Well, I'll leave you alone then and get back to what I was doing," he said before walking back to his lab. Peter looked around the lab and saw his students fully focused on the task at hand, still feeling delighted about the compliment, before he started working on his own robot. 30 minutes later, he created a robot similar to Dummy, but with his own tweaks to it, aka Dumb-E Spider-Man version. He was feeling nostalgic, what can he say? He got up after cleaning his space and walked around to the students. He observed, complimented, assisted and advised them on their robots. Morgan had created a similar robot to what they saw in the previous lab, as most students did, but her design was similar to a design him and Tony had created in the beginning stages that they scrapped due to its complexity and difficulty to mass produce. Peter complimented her immensely, proud of the work she completed in the short amount of time. She smiled shyly, thanking him before she continued tinkering and tweaking the robot. Another 30 minutes passed before Emily announced it was time for lunch. The kids were grateful and left their robots on the desks before walking to the cafeteria. It was large and had multiple food chains, more like a food court than a cafeteria, honestly. He could hear the students discussing where they were going to eat before he went up to Emily. "What do you recommend I get?" he asked, looking at the options available to him. She hummed contemplatively. "There's a deli not many people frequent, but their subs are really good," she finally said. Peter's eyes landed on the deli she mentioned. "Perfect, I've been in need of a good sub." He thanked her before walking over to said deli. It was small and hidden in between two corner shops. He wasn't the only one there. A woman, who seemed about his age, was ordering when he got there. He looked up from his phone as she walked to the side to wait for her order. He could only see her side profile, but that was all he needed to see. Michelle Jones. His first love. She had lost her memories of him, but he would never lose his memories of her. He moved to the counter, looking up at the sign of all the subs they sell, pretending to contemplate on what to eat, while trying not to focus on the woman next to him, the loss he couldn't grieve. "Hi," he said hoarsely to the lady behind the counter. He cleared his throat before continuing. "I'll have the meatball sub, please." "One meatball sub, all right? Anything else?" she asked. "No thanks, that's all, thank you." "Alright, that will be $4.99. Your order will be ready in 10 minutes. You can wait over there." He paid and stood to the side where MJ was. She was using her work tablet before looking up at him. He could see her from the corner of his eyes, wondering who he was, before looking back down. He stood there awkwardly for a couple of minutes, using his phone to distract him before he saw something appear in front of his face. It was the tablet. He focused on it and saw an accurate illustration of himself looking very distressed. He looked at it surprised, then followed the hand to MJ's face. She was smirking slightly. "I haven't done this in a while, draw someone in distress, I mean, but I couldn't help it. You look very worried. Are you okay?" she asked kindly, but he could tell she was trying to keep the amusement off her face. Oh my God, she found his discomfort comical. He just stared at her, his heart beating out of his chest. Yeah, I guess I kind of am," he chuckled sheepishly. "No need to be shy. What's your name? I haven't seen you here before." "Oh, I'm Peter Parker. I work at Midtown High School, and I'm here with my students for a field trip," he replied, pointing to the students scattered around the space. He surprised himself with how well he kept his voice from wavering. "Really? That's interesting. I used to go there, actually," she said casually. "Oh, wow, what a small world, huh?" He smiled. A small world it was. He couldn't believe this was happening, and he couldn't believe how well he was handling it. Out of everyone, he would have never expected to see MJ, his MJ, here. It's been years, and she's still as beautiful as the last time he saw her. "Yeah." She seemed as if she was about to say something before her order arrived. She thanked the server before turning back to Peter. "Well, I got my sub, so I'm going to head back. It was nice meeting you, Peter Parker," she said before turning away. Peter had let her go once, and he didn't think he could do it again. So before he could stop himself, he called back to her. Hey, I didn't get your name, he said, stumbling over his words. He could scold himself later, but for now, he needed to keep this conversation going for as long as he could. Oh, I thought you would never ask, she chuckled softly. His heart melted at the sound. I'm Michelle Jones. Well, Michelle, would you care to join me for lunch? I feel our conversation was cut short, he said, a small smile playing at his lips. Her eyes narrowed at him, wondering what this was about. He hoped she didn't think he was flirting or asking her on a date. Well, he wished he could, but this was really not the time or place. He had avoided her and Ned for many years, but seeing her again, talking to her again, he couldn't let himself let go. He wished they had met somewhere else, where Peter was simply a 26-year-old man talking to a 26-year-old woman. But alas, he was Mr. Parker the teacher, and she was Dr. Michelle Jones the... He still didn't know what she did, but now was the perfect time to find out, no? Well, all right, she concluded. Lead the way. He took his sub that had just arrived and led her to an empty table he spotted. They sat across from each other, and he could see the students noticing them and whispering amongst themselves, interest clear on their faces, but he ignored them. So, what do you do here at Stark Industries? He asked. I'm a tech ethics and innovation strategist. His blank impression must have been a clear sign that he had no idea what that meant, because she laughed before she further explained. Concisely, I help decide what tech should be created and ensure that it impacts the world in a way that is ethical and beneficial. He nodded his head in understanding. It suits you. Oh? And how would you know that? She said, smirking, an eyebrow raised. Oh, I mean from the brief conversation we've had, it seems to suit you. She chuckled. Thank you. I'm glad you think it suits me. So, tell me, how is Midtown High these days? Well, it's as good as it's ever been, really. I used to go there too, actually, so it's changed, obviously. For the better as well, but I'm enjoying it. The kids are great, and I... Before he could continue, she interrupted. Wait, you also went to Midtown? Yeah. What class? Well, before the blip I would have been class of 2019, but I blipped, so I actually graduated 2025, he explained. So we were in the same class? How come I don't recognise you? His heart hurt at that. For her to have confirmed she didn't recognise him hurt more than he thought it would. Yeah, he said quietly. I was a bit of a wallflower. She looked at him in doubt. You were a wallflower? You don't seem like you should be, she muttered lowly to herself. Anyways, I would have noticed you regardless, but I guess my memory has escaped me. She doesn't realise how accurate that statement is. She still looked doubtful, but decided to move on. They talked for the next half an hour about their lives, what they've been up to since high school. Peter obviously left some things out, like how she was his girlfriend and lost all her memories of him, and how his life had never been full ever since. He forgot how much he'd enjoyed her company. He obviously had a couple girlfriends since MJ. No one came close though, except for maybe Gwen, who he met at an internship after graduating university. But it still wasn't MJ. No one could ever be MJ. A bell rang nearby, and they both looked up at the sound. It was Emily rallying the students, assembling them in order to lead them to an auditorium for the ceremony. Oh, that seems to be for me. I guess I gotta go, he said, looking at her. He was able to hide the longing from his face, but his heart seemed to be attached to his wrist, taking him wherever she goes. It was always hers, anyways. Oh, well, I should be heading back anyways as well. I really enjoyed talking to you. We should meet up again sometime, a little more casually, I think, she said with a small smile. Definitely. It was nice meeting you, Michelle, he replied, grinning. Likewise, Peter. Oh, and it's MJ. That's what my friends call me. She smiled. Well, I would love to see you again, MJ. I enjoyed this a lot, he said, grinning. Likewise, she agreed, her smile growing slightly. They exchanged numbers before she left to do whatever it was she needed to do. Peter's heart leapt into his throat. MJ. She said he could call her MJ. He was riding on his wave of ecstasy as he caught up to his students. They all side-eyed him, but continued following their tour guide, except for Morgan, who hung back with him. Mr. Parker, do you know her? She asked. The other students' conversations lowered, all wanting to hear his answer. You could say that. He wouldn't tell them a thing. If he knew one thing about his students, they would tease him till kingdom come. How do you know her? You're being very nosy today, Miss Stark. He whispered her title, so only she could hear him. He could tell she was alarmed, but she hid it well. Her mother's daughter. And you're being very evasive, Mr. Parker, she said, exasperated. He just smiled at her cunningly, before leading her back to the students. Stay with your class, Morgan. They walked into the auditorium and filled the first couple of rows. Their robots lined up on a table set up on the stage. The students' excitement grew as Dr. Miller, the R&D scientist from earlier, walked up on the stage. Hello, everyone, he greeted. The students responded in cheers. I'm so glad and impressed with the skills and innovations that are standing by me today. You all had an hour to design and complete a robot of your creation, with minimal help. While some of you weren't able to complete the robot itself, your designs were still counted and judged by myself and the interns in my lab. We have some bright minds with us in this room today. The students all glowed at the praise. Today there will be 3 winners. All will receive prizes, and the most remarkable one will be bestowed with a prize to match. Now, before we begin, I have a surprise. I won't be the one announcing the prize, but a special guest has decided to come and do the honours of announcing the winners. Everyone please welcome the CEO of Stark Industries, Pepper Potts. Before he even completed his sentence, gasps and squeals were heard around the auditorium, and as soon as Pepper appeared on the stage, the cheers and claps resonated off the walls, echoing like thousands of people were in the room with them. She smiled and waved confidently at the students, her eyes lingering a little longer on Morgan than the others. I wanted to thank you all for coming. For years, we have provided field trips to Stark Industries to multiple science and technology high schools around New York, but I would like to say that this year I have seen some of the most exceptional innovations, she announced into the mic. The students cheered once more. While I may not be the innovator or genius that Tony was, I know he would be so proud to know that such brilliant students walked these halls, carrying his legacy with them. That is why the runner-ups will be gifted a Stark Nano tablet and gift bag, she said, before pausing to allow the students to cheer in excitement before continuing. While the winner will have the honour of receiving an internship at Stark Industries during the summer. The students exclaimed, some jumping out of their seats. Peter was equally shocked, but also so happy that his kids could have such an amazing opportunity. When he got his internship, even if it didn't start as such, he had learned so much. It helped that Tony was his mentor, but he knew his kids would gain valuable experience. Pepper regained the students' attention before pulling out cue cards. Before I announce the winners, I would just like to say that everyone has done an amazing job, and none of your efforts will go to waste. You'll all get participation certificates as well as a gift bag of your own. Now, let me begin by announcing third place. The students were eager, all of them vibrating in their seats at the suspense of wondering who would be receiving these exceptional rewards. Third place goes to... She pulled out the card stating the winner before reading it aloud. Noah Rays, congratulations! The students cheered as Noah passed them and walked up to the stage. Peter had seen his robot while walking around the lab. He had complimented him on its uniqueness and creativity. Noah was handed his prize by Dr. Miller before he stood for a photo with both the scientist and Pepper. After, he was told to stand on the side of the stage and wait for the other winners to be announced. Second place goes to... A low rumble of excitement moved through the students. Morgan Stark, congratulations, sweetheart. The students once again exclaimed, not only in cheers, but in shock at hearing Morgan's true last name. He knew some of his students had suspicions, especially after some had started noticing her badge and connecting the dots, but it was still shocking news regardless. Morgan seemed shy as she stepped onto stage to receive her gift as well as a hug from her mother. Pepper whispered something in Morgan's ear that made her blush in embarrassment before they also stood for a photo. Now, she stated into the mic after the kids had relaxed. Before I announce our first place winner, I would just like to say once again how proud I am of all of you. You all did wonderful jobs and are each worthy of the praise that you received today. Even if you don't win the internship today, I hope to see you all in the future as employees of my company. It would be an honour to have you, she said sincerely. The students all proudly cheered, and so did Peter, for his students who truly were worthy of every good thing happened to them. So, the final winner of the competition is Ethan Cho. Congratulations, Ethan. Come on up and collect your prize. Ethan walked up to the stage giddily and accepted his prize. At this point there was a standing ovation as all the winners stood for photos. Peter patted the backs of his students nearest to him, who were dispirited, proclaiming how proud he is of them. He was then also called on stage to join the photos. As he was leading the winners down the steps and about to follow them, he was stopped with a hand on his wrist. He turned and looked at Dr. Miller, who guided him back on stage to stand beside him and Pepper. The winners had stopped, wondering what was happening, before being ushered back by Emily to their seats. Peter was extremely confused, but waited as Pepper began speaking again, this time looking directly at Peter. Mr. Parker, I wanted to praise you for how well you've taught and guided your students, and I would like to bestow you with a prize of my own. We know you weren't part of the competition, however, we still evaluated your robot. I must say, I haven't seen greatness like that since Tony. Peter's eyes widened at her praise and attention. He didn't know what to do, and he wasn't sure how to react. He just felt as old as his students as he searched her eyes. Did she realise how much that meant to him? You are a brilliant man, Mr. Parker, and we would love if you could join us as well in the R&D department during the summer break. Your creativity, quick thinking and innovation skills are rare in our industry, and we would be lucky to have you this summer, she said, smiling kindly at him, just like she used to. He nodded, honoured, and at a loss for words. She beamed when he accepted her gift and lowered her mic for a photo. After the photo, she turned again and looked at him. I hear Friday had a mix-up and recognised you today, she said, turning off the mic so only he could hear her, something knowing passing through her gaze. Yeah, not to dishonour Mr. Stark's work, but I think it glitched. Morgan did get mad when I mentioned that earlier, but I don't have any other explanation, he chuckled lowly. I might, she said as she put the mic down on the podium where she found it before. I would love to talk more about this. Are you free for dinner at 8 p.m. tonight? She asked casually. He stood there in shock. He didn't know what was happening. Why did she know why Friday recognised him? Dr. Strange made sure his existence was erased everywhere. So, how? Well, he would have to go to dinner to find out. So, he agreed. Peter knocked on the door of the Stark estate, where Tony and Pepper usually hosted formal events and parties. He knew this wasn't where they lived full-time, but he knew this conversation was too sensitive to have in a public setting like a restaurant, but too formal to have at their actual home. He stood in front of the door, in a semi-formal outfit, black trousers and a dark blue polo shirt, at exactly 8 p.m. He knew Pepper was a stickler for time, and didn't want to ruin his chance at this opportunity that presented itself. Someone might remember him. It had been so long since he had hoped. The door opened and it was Happy. He had only seen him at the lobby, but seeing him up here, so close, was strange yet familiar. He smiled at him and said, Hello, Mrs. Potts invited me for dinner at 8 p.m. I'm Peter Parker. He held out his hand for a handshake, while Happy stared. A couple seconds later, Happy was still staring, and it was starting to get awkward, but before Peter could pull his hand back and dig himself out of this hole of embarrassment, Happy took it and shook it slowly. His hand still engulfed Peter's, despite him having grown and filled out these past 10 years. Even if he wasn't Spider-Man anymore, he liked to stay in shape in case anything happened. Better safe than sorry. "Yes, Pepper told me. Let me take you to the dining room." He led them to the dining room, this one smaller than the one he remembered seeing last time, but still just as grand. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, lighting up the 12-seater grand dining table. The walls were lined with sconces that matched the chandelier. It was very beautiful. He could see the table set up for where him and Pepper were meant to eat. He was led to his seat before being told that Pepper would be there soon. He continued looking around, marvelling at the place, when Pepper walked in. He wasn't shocked as he heard her heels clicking closer to the room a couple of minutes ago, but he still stood up abruptly and greeted her clumsily. "Oh, hello, Miss Potts. You have a beautiful home. Thank you for having me again." She laughed lightly and ushered him to sit down once more, where she herself settled across from him. "Thank you for the compliment, Mr. Parker. I hope getting here was okay?" she asked. "Well, New York traffic is never easy to get around, but thankfully I wasn't stuck in it for too long, so it was all right," he said. She nodded again, smiling at him. He sat there trying not to fidget in his seat, feeling her gaze focused on him. "Well, that's a relief. Anyways, I would like to congratulate you again. I've briefly mentioned it earlier, but you remind me a lot of Tony. I've become quite familiar with Tony's works after he passed, organising it all, and your designs remind me of some of his that I found. You have a very similar thought processes," she said, chuckling. His heart started racing a bit at the praise and comparison to Tony again. The conversation has barely started, and he's already feeling overwhelmed. "Thank you. It's such an honour, honestly. I used to dream of working in Stark Industries when I was younger, but teaching ended up being my calling, I guess." He laughed sheepishly. "This is a dream come true, really." "I'm glad," she said, smiling at him. Then her gaze turned knowing. He knew the conversation was about to take a turn, for better or worse. That is yet to be decided. "Well, as I mentioned earlier, I might have an idea why Friday may have remembered you." He gulped. "You do?" "Yes. You know, when I was going through Tony's things, I found a journal of his. I never knew it existed. I actually never knew he journaled at all. But there were so many things I never knew about Tony, I realised. Specifically about the content he wrote in that journal." She paused, trying to gauge his reaction. Peter was confused. He also never knew about this journal. Well, he knew Tony had one, because he would sometimes write in it while they were in the lab together, but he thought he was just jotting down ideas. Maybe it was something else. She could probably see the confusion evidently displayed on his face, because she continued. "In the beginning, it was just notes about random things he did in the lab. I thought it was a progress journal of sorts, when he suddenly began writing about a kid he met, that he gave an internship to. It was Spider-Man," she said, her eyes piercing his again. Peter's heart was beating very hard in his chest that he could hear it. He wondered if it were loud enough for her to hear as well. There were multiple pages where he talked about the kid, as he liked to call them, but some pages were entirely blank, like someone erased it altogether. It confused me at first. He had multiple of these journals. Some focused solely on the kid, the things they did in the lab together, how he was getting on as Spider-Man, and so on. But still, pages upon pages were completely blank. Some books were almost completely empty, that I believe they weren't even used if it weren't for the random entries in the middle of the book, or the coffee stains randomly splattered among the empty pages. Like I said, there are many things about Tony I don't know, but I think he would have told me about this kid that would visit his lab 2 to 3 times a week, that he obviously adored, and, at some points, loved like his own. So I asked Friday if she knew anything about this, but she seemed unaware of this as well. That made me realise that magic must have been involved, because there was no way that an entire person could disappear from Tony's life, as well as mine it may seem, this easily. So I asked Dr. Strange to meet me. I asked him if it was possible for someone to be erased from someone else's memory, and of course it is. But this was no simple memory erasure spell. This kid disappeared from Friday's memory, and his name never appeared on any of the journals. When I mentioned that to him, he told me about a spell that was almost never used, except for in dire situations. An erasure spell that erases a person's entire existence from the universe. Anything that could link us to them, gone. That's when I realised that is what happened here. That's also when I made it my mission to search for this kid, who seemed to be such an important person in Tony's life. So I asked Friday to search for any recent sightings of Spider-Man and track him down. But apparently Spider-Man hasn't been active in the last 8 years, so we had to search for footage before then, when Tony was still alive, and a little after his death. It took weeks of searching before we were able to come up with one substantial piece of evidence of who he was. He lived in Queens. So we narrowed down our search, and that's when we found a video of a young man fighting off a robbery. He had a similar build to Spider-Man, seemed to be around his age, and the same fighting style. So we gathered all we could find about him, and it led us straight to you. She finished. Peter felt like throwing up. The lump in his throat grew the more she talked. His breathing quickened faster than he could control, and his heart was beating too fast. He felt like dying. He looked down, trying to hide the tears that had forced their way into his eyes, trying to get into control of his breathing, but he couldn't. He wanted to stand and walk away, find a quiet place to calm down, but if he stood, he would fall. His senses starting acting up too. He could hear every sound, smell every scent, see everything. The lights seemed to dim in the dining room before he felt a hand rest on his thigh. He jumped. Despite his senses going haywire, he didn't notice Pepper walk over to him and kneel beside him. He looked at her eyes, searching. He was still breathing hard, but she looked at him in understanding, and something else. Was that hurt? Why did you erase yourself from our lives, Peter? What happened? She asked so softly. If his senses weren't already dialed to 100, he wouldn't have heard. That's when he broke. He dropped to the ground beside her and let everything out. He hadn't allowed himself to sob like this in years. There was no point in mourning something you will never get back, but here, in this room, where he's not really remembered, but he's missed, he couldn't hold it in. He felt her arms go around him as she rubbed soothing circles on his back, and hear her murmured calming words as she stayed with him till he gained back some control. A couple minutes passed till he finally was able to lift his head from her shoulder. When he looked at her, she lifted her hands and rubbed the tears from his face, her eyes also watery. "Do you remember me?" he asked timidly. He didn't want to hope, but was that too much to ask for? Hadn't he given enough? She shook her head no, sadness seeping from every bit of her. He nodded, looking away from her, before standing up and wiping his eyes. "I'm sorry, this is very unprofessional of me. He couldn't complete his sentence, because he honestly had no idea what else to say. She stood up as well, dusting off the invisible lint on her skirt, and looked at him once more. "I may not remember who you are, Peter. I might not know a whole lot about you yet. But I do know you meant a lot to Tony. So, if you meant a lot to him, you mean a lot to me. I'm sorry it took so long." She whispered that last part. Peter looked away from her lest he start crying again. He excused himself to the bathroom and nearly ran out of the room. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, his eyes puffy and nose red. Despite all the turmoil he's feeling, he could see a twinkle of something in his eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. He had to learn to forget who he was and build a new identity for Peter Parker. But that glint, that was old Peter, finally being remembered, finally being acknowledged. He left the bathroom after finally gathering himself. When he entered the dining room, Pepper was still there. This had not been a dream. She smiled at him as he sat back down at his seat. This time, though, the conversation was focused on him. She wanted to know what he was up to these past couple years, so he told her everything. They laughed and cried. Happy and Morgan joined them at some point as well. Apparently they had been listening in the entire time and had a couple questions of their own. By the end of the night, he had their numbers saved under his phone again. plans for him and Happy to visit May's gravesite together, and an Avengers meet-up in the near future. That last one was still up for debate. Peter was unsure if he wanted everyone to know who he was yet, but he was happy to have this at least. Still, there was a promise he had yet to keep. That night, when he returned home, he opened his closet and pulled down a box he hadn't touched in years. In it was the first suit Tony had made him. He tried it on, and it surprisingly fit well, if a little tight around certain areas, but that was an easy fix. He spent all night altering it to his new measurements and updating some of the coding in the suit. The sun had risen when he finally finished. He looked at his work in satisfaction before finally falling asleep. Thank God the field trip was on a Friday, because he didn't know how he could attend school after everything that went down. When he woke up later that day, for the first time in years, he put on his Spider-Man suit. "Hello, Spider-Man," Karen greeted him. "Hello, Karen. It's been a while. I've missed you," he said. "Likewise. Are there any bad guys in need of fighting?" she asked. He just laughed, nostalgia washing over him. He looked down at the note he held in his hand that he had spent all night writing and rewriting. "No, not today." "Then what do you plan to do?" "I gotta go see about a girl." Thank you for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed this work and have a lovely rest of your day.